Good evening, everyone. I'm McKenna, and I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. Thank you so much for joining us for another virtual event this evening. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Jason Pinter talking about his new book, A Stranger at the Door. But while those of you are joining to watch, we have about a minute when that normally takes place. I'm going to go ahead and go over some things that are upcoming, and then I'll have Jason join me in just a minute. So in case you are a fan of the virtual events, come back tomorrow night. I'm going to be talking with Tracy Lambrecht of PJ Tracy. She has a new book, Deep in the Dark, which is the start of a new series set in LA, and I highly recommend. Next Tuesday, we'll be talking with Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. And then Thursday is kind of an unusual event. We're actually going to be hosting Beth Betschke for her nonfiction book, Blood, Powder, and Residue, How Crime Labs Translate Evidence into Proof. So if you are an aspiring crime writer or current crime writer, that might be helpful for you to tune in and have questions for her. Also, I'm going to right now drop a link in the comments and in the chat. If you'd like more information about Jason's books or to order, that link is right there. And if you have any questions for Jason, don't be shy. We're going to get to those a little later in the talk. You can put them in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook. So I'm going to add Jason back in. Hello, Jason.
Hello, McKenna.
So let me get you officially introduced, and then we will chat about Rachel Marin #2.
Sounds great.
Jason Pinter is the best-selling author of 7 novels for adults: Hideaway, the first Rachel Marin Thriller, the acclaimed Henry Parker series, and the standalone thriller The Castle, excuse me, as well as the middle-grade adventure novel Zeke Bartholomew, SuperSpy, and the children's book Miracle. His books have over 1 million copies in print worldwide. He's been nominated for numerous awards, including the Thriller Award, Strand Critics Award, Barry Award, and Shamus Award, and The Mark was optioned to be a feature film. Pinter is also the founder of Polis Books, an independent press, and was honored by Publisher Weekly's Star Watch, which recognizes young publishing professionals who have distinguished themselves as future leaders of the industry. He's written for The New Republic, Entrepreneur, The Daily Beast, Esquire, and more. He lives in New Jersey with his wife and their 2 daughters. And as I said, he's here tonight to discuss the new Rachel Marin book, A Stranger at the Door, which is the second in the series. So there it is. How are you?
I'm good. That was a great introduction. I feel like I better than I could do myself. You make me sound a lot more impressive than I think I am. So thank you.
My pleasure. So this is a great new series, but I'm finding that even though, this is #2 in the series, we actually haven't talked to you about this book. The first one was canceled. Tour had to cancel last year because of the pandemic. Yeah. So I haven't talked to you about Rachel Marin, and we have a lot of people who tune in to discover new authors. So will you tell us a little bit about her, from the beginning?
Absolutely, yeah. So Rachel Marin was introduced in my novel Hideaway, which came out last year, and McKenna and I were just chatting before this for a little bit, and I was literally scheduled to sign Hideaway at Murder by the Book, literally as the pandemic was getting out of control and everything got canceled. So it's a shame I didn't get to see people in person. But so Hideaway, Rachel Marin is a single mother with 2 small children. After a traumatic event at the beginning of the story that shatters her whole world, she's forced to move to a small town with her children, change their names, reinvent their lives to get away from this traumatic past. In doing so, she also sort of hones both her mind and her body into a weapon to be able to protect her children, because she feels society let her down and they weren't able to protect her in a way that mattered. So she's planning to lay low, stay calm, protect her children. But then when the former mayor of the town is found dead, Rachel knows that it was murder, not suicide. And because she saw what happened when somebody failed her family in the past, she refuses to let people fail this woman in the present. So she starts to investigate the crime on her own, which of course puts her at odds with the actual detectives investigating the crime, but also threatens to reveal the secrets that she's been trying to keep under wraps since she moved. So really, I wanted to write a kind of a thriller, suspense, mystery series. I felt like a lot of the characters in these series tend to be they were kind of loners. They were sort of, can be misanthropes. They're the kind of people who could close down the bar at 3 a.m. and get into fights and skulk down alleys at 3 a.m. But Rachel is a mother. She has to go home. She has to make dinner. She has to get her kid ready for school. And I just love how does somebody balance wanting to kind of be a crime fighter, sort of an amateur unlicensed detective, with having these two children who relied on her. And I thought that immediately created a really interesting conflict, both for Hideaway and hopefully future books.
Yeah, absolutely. So where does she find herself and what's she investigating in A Stranger at the Door?
Yeah, so in A Stranger at the Door, Rachel finds herself with a little bit of peace and tranquility. But it wouldn't be a whole lot of fun if it stayed that way. But she's put the case from Hideaway behind her. She started to sort of grow into her new surroundings a little bit more. She's tentatively entered into a romantic relationship, which she hasn't allowed herself to open up in that way in a very long time. But then when her son's school teacher is found brutally murdered, she has to get involved in that case because she's been working as a consultant to the police department now. And at the same time, her son, who is still very traumatized from the events of the first book, is sort of taken under the wing by this sort of shadowy, charismatic businessman who's exploiting emotionally fragile young boys for selfish means. So she's being pulled in two different directions. One, this murder that she has to investigate, and two, her son, who might get lost because of these emotional issues that he's never addressed. And of course, these two paths converge, and Rachel finds out that maybe, the guy who's trying to bring her son under his wing might have something to do with the murder, and it all sort of comes to a head. So what she was hoping this would sort of be peaceful, but it ends up being not, and her peace turns into a nightmare.
Good job. That's not easy to do. You did a good job making it sound great, not giving too much away, but actually being an accurate description. I will say,
yeah, I don't want to get that's tough because I want to allude to a lot, not give too much away, but give people just enough that like, oh, that sounds good. Not like, oh, now I know the whole story. Trust me, you don't know the whole story.
No, exactly. I will say I found her son's storyline both sad and compelling, and really wanting to root for things to be resolved with that, because he's clearly being preyed upon as someone who's gone through something tough, and it's a kind of a hard storyline to not be moved by. So good job with that one. I will
Thank you.
also, yeah, absolutely. I will also say, admitted bias here, I am always skeptical of male authors writing female main characters. Always. I know I'm not the only one out there. There have been butcher jobs done before, and I'm sure it goes both ways. But I will say you do a very good job of writing a female main character. I like Rachel a lot, and I think she's just fantastic. So you said that you went into it wanting kind of someone who does have a backstory and children to protect. Is there a reason you didn't just go with a dad?
Yeah, it's a very specific reason. So I started writing Hideaway pretty shortly after our oldest daughter was born. So I want to say maybe 3-ish years ago. Hideaway came out last year. And I remember there was a moment when our oldest daughter was about 6 months old. And, every parent sleeps with like a little monitor by the side of their bed so they can watch their kid, at night to make sure they're still breathing. And when our daughter was about 6 months old, I remember my wife used to stay awake all night to watch her on the monitor to make sure she's okay. And me being sometimes kind of a moron, sometimes at one point I said to my wife, you don't have to watch her all the time. She's 6 months old. She's pretty much out of the woods. She'll be fine. And my wife said something to me that still sticks with me, which is you don't know what it's like to grow something inside of you and then have it exist outside of you and not knowing if it's safe all the time. And that really sort of hit me. And at the time I was thinking about what book I was going to write next. And just something kind of clicked in that I wanted a character who had this emotional bond. And yes, I could have written about a father, but I do think truly, as much as I try to be a hands-on father, and I take pride in that, there's a bond, I think, between a mother and a child that just is not there with a father, just because of the biology, because of everything else. So it was hugely important to me to write a character that had that bond. I just felt there was a stronger emotional tie there. There's just something about a mother protecting their children that it was a step beyond emotionally than it would have been for a father. So it was necessary to me that Rachel was a mother, because I just felt it made her, on the same hand, that much more of a protector, but also that much more vulnerable. And I thought that'd be a really interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, and I mean, and it works well. That's what I thought you might say, but it's good to have confirmation. um, so I would like also, I mean, I want to talk about Polis books a little bit. We can talk about it now or later, but how on earth do you find time to do everything that you do?
It is very hard right now. I would say it was hard a year ago before the pandemic hit. It's harder now. Now that I can't work out of an office, and my wife and I both work from home, sharing an office, and we have we have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. It's not easy, especially now that I'm writing. You know, I've been under contract. I essentially I don't have any free time. That's the truth of it. I don't get to read for pleasure nearly as much as I would like, and I'd love to read for pleasure as much as possible. You know, when I'm working on a book, I keep moving forward. I don't have the time to write. You know, everyone says like write 2,000 words a day. I don't have time for that, and to run Polis books at the same time, and raise 2 small children, and not go completely insane. So to me, it's, you know, if I'm writing a book, as long as I'm moving it forward, even if it's 200 words a day, I'm progressing the story and progressing the characters. With Polis, it's good that I hired Chantel Osman, who I think McKenna probably knows from sort of the crime community, and she runs our Agora imprint, which is dedicated towards underrepresented diverse voices in crime fiction. So I do have some help along with our distributor. We have some sales and marketing. But it's not easy. I really, you know, so these days, whenever I hear somebody say like, I'm so bored, there's nothing left on Netflix, I finished all of Hulu, I want to like jump through the screen and just beat them with my my Disney Plus subscription.
Listen, every day we have customers in the store who tell us how they have nothing to do and they're so bored, and we all look at each other and go, I wish we could get bored. Like we are
I would kill to be bored. I'm still like on episode 2 of The Mandalorian.
Well, I'm a little better than that, only because my husband is the one who watches it at 2 a.m. So I'm kind of forced to like be the person who he talks to about it. But aside from Mandalorian, like I too would kill to be bored. I have not had 1 second of boredom. I have not baked sourdough bread. I've done none of those things. It has been work this whole time. But
I think I saw somebody on Twitter said like they took a Saturday and watched like the entire Lord of the Rings extended edition DVDs back to back to back, which is like 12 and a half hours. I'm just like, I haven't had 12 and a half hours in a year, let alone day. And I'm just like, I'm gonna take your baked bread and I'm gonna do something bad with it.
Yeah, fair enough. I feel that too. And when people come in and they tell us that, we just go, oh, well, I'm sure things will get better soon or something. And then they leave and we're like, ah. So yeah, I get it. Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned Agora books, and I actually think that you and I are kind of on the same page here about making sure that underrepresented voices are heard. I think it's a fantastic thing you've done. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been sort of, as McKenna knows, I've been sort of part of the, I guess, crime fiction community now for, I'd say about 15 years, give or take. And especially for the last 5 or so years, there's really been a concerted, I don't want to say push, because I feel like the push didn't quite happen. There's been a number of voices criticizing the community, rightfully so, for not being as inclusive, for excluding more diverse and underrepresented voices, that the community was starting to feel very homogenous in terms of race, gender, sexuality, and at the same time, it didn't really make other people feel welcome. And a lot of people were saying that, hey, this is a big problem, but it really felt like nobody was really doing much about it. I had been feeling that way for a while, but again, I sort of hadn't done necessarily a thing about it other than sort of complaining a lot to on Twitter and to people in bars and at conferences. But when I started talking to Chantel, she thought the same thing. And we both decided, like, let's literally, I wanted to literally put my money where my mouth is, and let's start a dedicated imprint for diverse and underrepresented voices in crime fiction, to say, not only are we saying this industry, this community needs to be more inclusive and more diverse, we're literally going to dedicate an imprint to that, to give them a home, to make sure these people feel welcome, to say, because the truth is, a lot of authors didn't feel welcome, so they weren't submitting or they weren't finding us. They didn't feel comfortable at conferences, which is not just a shame; it's intolerable.
Yeah.
So we said, like, we're gonna give these people a home, and we're gonna promote you, and we're gonna tell people that these are authors worth reading. So we launched in the fall. I think we announced it in early 2019. We'd had our launch list ready to go for a little while and sort of held off for a big announcement. We launched in fall 2019 with 3 books. Three Fifths by John Bircher, which was nominated for every award under the sun, was nominated for the Edgar, the Strand, the Anthony, named one of the best books of the year by Chicago Tribune. Ninja Daughter by Tori Eldridge, and Remember by Patricia Shanae Smith. And we've gone on from there. I think in 2020, I think we did another 8 or so books under the Agora imprint, and we're looking to do about 6 to 10 per year. But it was hugely important to us to say this is not just lip service. We're not just saying we need to be more diverse. We're literally going to dedicate an imprint and put a lot of money and effort into promoting authors that have maybe, for whatever reason, not been published or not been welcome in this community, because this community needs to grow and evolve, and as it had not for probably 50 years.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought it was admirable and so much needed when you announced that, and was so excited about that, because we also try actively to make sure that all voices are represented in Murder by the Book stock as well, more than I would say some other independent bookstores out there. And, it was so great when you did that. And I will say, to your credit, you did that well before the most recent Black Lives Matter, Black Voices Matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were all over that a while ago.
Yeah.
And now it's so nice that publishers are starting contests and starting programs to really be more diverse. But your line has been fantastic, and I do just want to applaud you for that. What do you have coming out that we should all make sure to not miss, either in Agora or Polis?
Yeah, so this month we have actually just this coming Tuesday, we have on Agora, we have a novel called Tricky by Josh Stallings. And it's a different kind of diverse book because it's actually neurodiverse. And the author was inspired by his own son, who has neurological issues. And it's a crime novel about a man who has neurological issues. So that was a very different kind of book, in that it was not necessarily different in terms of race or gender or sexuality, but in terms of neurodiversity. So it's really important for us to get that on the list. So that's coming out on Tuesday. Next month, we have a book that I'm hugely excited about, which is Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pillaio, which is sort of like a Latinx Final Girls by Riley Sager, sort of this great horror thriller mashup by Cynthia Pillaio, who's been nominated for the Latino Book Award multiple times. And I think she's going to be a rising star on the scene. She's really fantastic. We have, if you like cozies, everyone likes a little bit of escape these days. A Cat on the Case by Clea Simon, which is the new book in her Witch Cats of Cambridge series. It's about magical felines who solve murders. And as McKenna knows, like, this is not my cup of tea generally, but it's so much fun, and it's such a palate cleanser, and it's just, especially nowadays when you need a bit of an escape, it's really wonderful. And so that's kind of through March. Then we get into April. We have a great debut novel called At the End of the World, Turn Left by Jana Slor, about an Israeli woman who has to go find her missing sister. We have While Nobody Is Watching, which is by Michelle Dunn. Michelle Dunn is a fascinating woman because she actually served in the Irish infantry in real life. And her book is about an Irish soldier suffering from PTSD. So she's writing about this world that she knows intimately. So it's about an Irish soldier with PTSD who gets caught up in crimes. But it's a great book, but I love the fact that the author was actually in the Irish infantry herself and could write about it. So, I don't want to go too far ahead, but we really have a pretty exciting kind of winter and spring coming out. And then even more great. Like, this is probably one of the coolest years I think we've had a Polis ever, just in terms of from January through the end of the year. We have a lot of great stuff coming up.
And I actually was chatting with Josh about Tricky the other day on Facebook, and I'm happy to say that we stock all of your books. We're so supportive of you guys, and if anyone is interested in ordering, you can absolutely order through us. Wendy, I see that you have requested that we post the Agora website. I will do that in just a second when I get Jason talking about the next question. So, obviously, you are a busy guy. Are you working on anything right now?
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that there'll be more books in the Rachel Marin series. I'm sort of have the third one percolating a little bit, and I'm as sort of with any series, it sort of depends on hopefully the books will sell enough that my publisher will want to keep doing them, and I certainly hope so because I love the character. But at the same time, I've got a standalone book that I'm sort of working on, and I'm just literally putting the final edits on something totally different that I've never written before, which is actually not for adults. Which I don't want to talk about too much because it's not done yet. So I have a few irons in the fire, and yeah. So ideally, I want to keep going with the Rachel Marin series. I want to do a standalone, and then I kind of want to veer off in a bit of a different direction too. And I'll keep everyone posted.
So a little bit about research and the writing process. So this one deals with arson. It deals with a couple grisly little details that clearly had historical context. How do you just do a lot of Googling, or do you have a roster of people that are professionals that you call? How does that work?
I do both. So I do, because there's a lot of police work and forensics involved. I do actually have some cops that I speak to, or people who work in forensics. So like I lived in Hoboken until recently, so I would always like talk to the chief of police and sergeants there to make sure that I would try to get that as accurate as possible. Um, I do have people in the forensic side who help me out a lot, and then truthfully, there is a lot online, but I never sort of rely on that. So I always make sure that everything I write is backed up many, many times over. But yeah, there's some, like you said, there's some grisly things that happen at the beginning of this book, and it's weird because on one hand, when I was writing, I think I know which scene you're talking about. When I was writing that scene, I was like, this is really kind of out there and messed up. Am I going too far? But at the same time, once you know why that happens, the idea is that there's the people who did it are sending a message. They want it to look as cruel and as painful as possible to deter other people from getting involved in their business. So they want it to be horrifying. So it wasn't necessary to sort of go that far. So I did a lot of research in terms of like some really sort of messed up stuff. And I think once you read this one scene, I think you'll know which one I'm talking about, and just know that I did a fair amount of research into this sort of torture method. And there's one episode of Game of Thrones in particular that was a little inspiration too.
Fair enough. Well, I will say that it's a weird phrase for me to say with regards to this. It is not gratuitous, because I do see why you were going for it as the yeah. So Oline Cogdill has just posted her review of the book, which she loved, as did I. So for those of you who want to read Oline, we love you, Oline, and thank you for posting that.
Yeah, I was so happy. Like anytime people like Oline or you, who have read everything under the sun and then some, when you like one of my books, it means the world, because I know you have such a basis and such a context for it. So like, as much as I love somebody who's never read a mystery thriller before likes it, it means a little more when somebody who's read everything likes it, because they can compare it to everything they've ever read.
Yeah. Well, I did, and Oline did, so congratulations. So let's see, what's next? So I think one of your strengths is your pacing. So this is my thinly veiled, do you outline question, but how do you accomplish such great pacing throughout the book?
I do not outline. I'm a full-on pantser. That is, if anyone's watching and doesn't know, sort of one of the big questions when you're writing a book, thrillers or otherwise, is, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? And generally, a plotter is someone who creates sort of like a very detailed outline for a book, from beginning to end. So they essentially have a framework, and then when they start writing page one, they already have a very detailed outline. They're essentially they have the skeleton, they're just fleshing it out. I'm very much a pantser in that when I start writing a book, I don't know how it's going to unfold. I sort of let the characters and the situations dictate to me. I would say I'm a 98% pantser though, because when I start a book, I generally know the opening scene. So for Stranger at the Door, there's a scene where you see the school teacher and you see what happens to him. I had that scene in my mind before I started. I said, okay, this is how we're going to open the book. Then I generally have a scene around halfway through the book or so, where there's a twist or a big set piece or something veers off in another direction. Then I generally know what happens at the end. Maybe not exactly, but I have a scene in mind, or I know the denouement, or I know what's going to happen, so that even if I don't know the entire book, I sort of have a couple landmarks that I can sort of point my car towards. But then as I'm going, even if I don't have an outline, I'm constantly thinking about the book. And anytime I have an idea about characters or plotting or anything, I write it down. I start with nothing, and then I end up with like a 25-page single space sort of outline that I don't start until I've started the book. And I'm texting myself so I won't forget things, but I'm just constantly, like, literally, it's like a living outline that grows as the book is written.
So that provides you kind of the direction of where you're going each day. When you sit down, you're like, okay, here's what we do today.
Exactly. And just for some reason, it's daunting, but at the same time now I've written, I think, enough books that I trust. If I like the characters, I sort of trust that it's going to come to me. Not to say there are days where I sit down and I'm like, uh-oh, what do I do? But it always seems to work itself out. And then I think the pacing part comes in the editing, because, I mean, Lord knows, with this book and with Hideaway and my other books, like, if you read the first draft, it is a shaggy dog. It is a mess. It is complete. Pacing is off. There's probably, like, the inciting incident probably doesn't happen until page 120. And you really have to work on that. And there are times where, like, if I find myself getting bored, I can only imagine what it's like for a reader who's not, who's not emotionally and financially invested in this book. So I think it's to me, I think pacing is something I've learned more over time. That you really want to, not only you have to, it's a very delicate balance to both get to the action quickly, but develop the characters fast enough that people will care about the action when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned knowing your characters and kind of trusting them. I always like to ask authors, has there been a moment when your character takes the wheel? You have a plan and the character's like, not really.
Absolutely. I would say Stranger at the Door is a perfect example of that, because there's a character who I introduced in Hideaway, and her name is Myra in Hideaway. And when I wrote Hideaway, I loved that character. I love what she did in that book. And I had no intentions beyond Hideaway. And then as I was finishing up Hideaway and thinking about A Stranger at the Door, I was like, I like this character. She doesn't want to leave. She kind of wants to come back. And so the character of Myra, who we meet in Hideaway, comes back under circumstances that I don't want to reveal now, but this is a character that grew on me so much to the point where she sort of forced her way back into the next book in a way that was essential to the plot. So that was, I love when a character does that, where they sort of make an imprint on me to the point where even if I didn't intend for them to be a larger part of the series as a whole, they insist on being that way. And that's what happened with Myra in A Stranger at the Door, where she was just like, I got to be a part of this book. And I was like, that's perfect, because I know how you fit into it.
That's great. Yeah, I love hearing that too. I always get kind of saddened when the author says, no, I'm in control of the characters. I'm like, that's not as fun of an answer.
No, it's not true at all. Absolutely not. I mean, this is not Stranger at the Door, but there's a project I'm working on right now where I will just say that a character I wrote for the book at the beginning, I intended him to be sort of like a very stereotypical kind of character, not a lot of depth to him. But then as the book went on, he just grew so many different levels and so many different sort of shades, and that was fully on him. So he went to me from someone who was essential to the plot, but sort of purposefully a stereotypical boring character, to somebody who was like, no, I actually have a lot more depth than you're giving me credit for. And so we went from a character that was very, very bland to now literally one of the most interesting characters in the book. And that was all on him.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So obviously you have a publishing company and you're a writer. What is your number one piece of advice to aspiring writers out there?
I would say find the time to write. And that sounds generic, but it's not, because I can't tell you how many times I go to a conference or I talk to writers and they say, I just don't have time to write. And I ask them, like, well, why not? What do you do? And they said, I work a 9-to-5 job. And I'm like, I work a 24/7 job, and I have 2 small children, and I have 2 full-time jobs, and I find time to write. So it means getting up an hour early to write, not going to the bar one night, to meet your friends, not watching a movie or not watching your favorite. Like, I think that's one of the hardest things. People like, I want to be a writer, but I don't want to find time to. Like, it takes sacrifice. You're going to give up certain things you want to do. Like, I am a hermit when I'm writing a book, and yeah, like I would love to go out to the bar every night, or I'd love to sort of like sit and play video games every night, but I want to see where this book goes. So I think that's one of the things is write, find time to write. Even if you don't think you have time to write, find time to write. Just bulldoze in there. I'd also say learn the industry. I think if you're going to be a writer and you have any intention of either making a career out of it or writing more than one book or actually being professionally published, learn the industry. Because if you're a small business owner, but you don't understand the industry that you have your business in, you're going to fail. You can have all the talent in the world, but understand the industry, know how to get your book to the right people, and know what to do after that.
That is a great piece of advice, because I feel like that is missing a lot of the time. And as a bookstore owner also, I tell people who come in and have just written a book that they need to figure out the business side of it too, because people just a lot of times
too much
no
information
idea.
out there to be. Yeah, there's too much information out there, mostly either for free or for very cheap, that you can't go into it naive. There's too much information out there. If you are going in like that if you're going into a bookstore asking them to help you get published, it's almost like you're being like willfully naive. And there's certain things like, I think with Agora, I think there are people who have been shunned from the industry or have not gotten a fair shake legitimately, and we wanted to even that scale. But then there are people who are shooting themselves in the foot, and that's a whole different thing. And I think that's what people need to like learn the industry a little bit more and put yourself in a place to succeed.
Yep, absolutely. So you mentioned wanting to be out at bars, but clearly we are not doing that right now. Do you have any intention of putting?
No.
Do you have any intention of putting COVID in your books?
Not as of right now. It feels a little too real and a little too close. I don't think people want to read about it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think they do right now. And I'm not currently writing anything where it serves the story. And I think that's what's got to come first, is what serves the story. And if like I write Rachel Marin #3 and the book is done, and then my editor comes back and says, you need to put COVID in there, like maybe I'll make a passing reference like, now that the virus was over. But I don't think I'm going to write a book where any sort of a large portion of the plot revolves around COVID, because just like, I've lived this, it sucks. I've been quarantining for 10 months. I've missed seeing you and all these great bookstores. Like I haven't gotten to watch like a TV show in 6 months because I have 2 small children. I want to get as far away from this as possible. I don't want to like, it doesn't need to be in my fiction because it's been too real.
Yeah, I agree with that just as a reader. And I know from what we've been selling, people have wanted escape. And so I don't know at what point people are going to not want escape, but it's not yet. People still want escape right now. So that makes sense to me. Before I move on with some reading questions and some that are not necessarily about Rachel Marin, I want to mention no one's asking any questions. So we have some comments, but no questions. If you guys have questions, for sure, pop them in there. We will get to them in a little bit, but I do have some more questions for Jason. Oh, I wanted to ask you, anything happening film or TV related? Because normally that question comes up quickly.
I have a film and TV agent who's shopping it around, and my fingers are crossed. I was very fortunate that a film agent, a really good one, fell in love with Hideaway and wanted to sort of shop it around. It's a tricky time right now to be sort of shopping around movies and film because nobody really knows what's going on in the industry. But I do have an agent who is working on it, so my fingers are certainly crossed. I think it'd be a great series for wherever, but it's sort of that's one of those things where I don't even think the industry knows what's going on just yet. So my fingers are crossed, and hopefully something will happen.
Yeah, I think it would translate well, again, because of her likability as a mother. Like, you have this great well-rounded character. And there's not all that much out there like that. So John was wondering if you could give us a general description of the novel. I will say with that question, and Jason certainly answer it again, but if you missed the beginning of this talk, as soon as our live is not live, as soon as our video is not live anymore on Facebook or YouTube, you can come back and watch them from the beginning. But Jason, since we have a specific request, if you don't mind giving another quick description, that would be great.
Yeah, so in A Stranger at the Door, Rachel Marin, who is a single mother who, after a traumatic event, moved with her small children to a small town in Illinois to restart their lives. After some traumatic events, both in her past and in Hideaway, she's found a modicum of sort of peace and tranquility. She's doing consulting work for the local police department. She's tentatively entered into a romantic relationship, and things seem to be going well. But then one of her son's teachers is brutally murdered, and Rachel has to investigate this murder because he had actually reached out to her because he had suspicions about something going on. And Rachel's son, who is still very emotionally fragile from the trauma he experienced previously, finds himself sort of being taken under the wing of this sort of shadowy but charismatic businessman who's exploiting emotionally fragile young men. And these two sort of paths diverge. Both the murder of her son's teacher and the fact that her son is now being sort of almost indoctrinated into this sort of strange Amway Ponzi scheme-ish cult. And if she's not careful, she'll both lose her son physically and mentally. And there's also a killer out there who wants to keep his secret. So what she started off hoping was a sort of lead to some peace and tranquility is very much not that.
And if you want to read more about it, I highly recommend it. And there's also a review in the comments that will give you even more. So about your reading. So what did you read in your formative years that made you want to be a writer? And was there like an aha book?
I would say so. When I grew up, I loved sort of like early mysteries and detective. I loved Hardy Boys. I loved Encyclopedia Brown. And I read those up to last year. So I'm kidding. Uh, no, I grew up on Hardy Boys and Encyclopedia. And I love those books. But I actually after that, I was hooked on epic fantasy for a very long time. Funny enough, not J.R.R. Tolkien. I actually don't think I read Tolkien until I was in my 20s. But I grew up on Terry Brooks, Piers Anthony, and Brian Jacques. So I loved the Sort of Shannara series, Piers Anthony novels, and Brian Jacques' The Redwall series. Those were Redwall, Mossflower, Matameo, Sort of Shannara, Elfstones of Shannara, Scions of Shannara. Like those were the first books where I remember going to the bookstore and literally waiting outside for it to open so I could get the new book when it came out. And I was literally the guy who like once I had the book in my hand, I would read 1,000-page book in like one day because I just loved them so much. I think after that, I got into Stephen King, as almost pretty much everyone did. But then I got into mysteries and thrillers, actually. So when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, we lived a couple blocks away from this great independent bookstore called the Black Orchid in New York City. And because we lived so close, my dad would go to that store maybe like every other week and always come back with like I remember there was like a big paper bag just full of books because he would go to the store and they had these wonderful proprietors, Bonnie and Joe, and he would walk in and say like, Bonnie and Joe, like, what do you recommend? And he would come back with like 20 books, and he would read a book and pass it to me, and read the next book and pass it to me, and that's how I got hooked on mysteries and thrillers. So I think I started reading them for enjoyment, and I think it was in college when I sort of decided like I kind of want to be a writer. I had no idea what that meant or how I would do it, but I knew I wanted to do it. And I remember there was one aha moment, and it's sort of a little bit different. So at the time, I had a girlfriend who lived. I went to college in Connecticut, but I had a girlfriend who lived in New York City. So I would drive back and forth to New York and to New York from Connecticut like several times a week. So I listened to a lot of audiobooks. And I listened to one audiobook in particular. I will not name it because the author doesn't deserve that kind of shout out, but it was really bad. And I remember listening to this audiobook, thinking, I can do better than this. And that was like, it was not like something that inspired me to greatness. It was like, I can do better than that. And I think that was a moment where I was like, okay, you say that, but like, put your money where your mouth is. Can you actually do it? And when I was in college, I wrote a really, really terrible coming of age story, not a mystery or thriller. But even though it was terrible and should never, ever see the light of day, and no one except me has ever read it, it proved to me that I could write a book, even if it wasn't very, very good. Getting from page 1 to page 300, whatever, was a really big step for me because it said like because like you don't write a book in a day, you don't write a book in a week, you generally don't write a book in a month, but it takes discipline. And if I could do that once, I was pretty sure I could do it again.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a milestone just to have it done. So I'm sure that was quite the accomplishment,
Yeah.
whether it's turned into the great American novel or not.
Oh, it
Um,
is not the it is not the great American novel by any. I feel like there are a lot of people who kind of like, I have the great American novel hidden in my desk, but it's only for me. It's like, no, this book was kind of a piece of sh something something, and it will never see the light of day. But at the same time, like, I knew I could get better, and I think that's a big thing for writers too, is having the knowledge that you can get better. Because I think you've probably seen this too. Like, there are writers who will come up to you at a conference or at a bar and say, like, my book is amazing, it's brilliant, I'm incredible. I don't trust those writers. I don't trust somebody who thinks they're amazing, because to me, it says like they don't have the gene in them to sort of self-edit or be self-critical. Anytime a writer, so I'm more sort of attracted to the writers who are like, who think they suck, because that to me says they're going to work to make it better. So the fact that I could look at that book and know it was kind of hot garbage, that to me said like, okay, I can do better.
yeah, I was talking to someone, I don't know, it's all a blur the last year doing these events, but I was talking to someone who said that being an author you have to balance the ego of thinking that someone actually cares about what you're writing and someone would want to read what you write with the fact that you're awful. And so it's never going to be good enough, and you need to keep editing to make it good enough for that person to read. And I thought that is a great summation, because yes, when people come up to me and, tell me how amazing their book is and that all of their family love it, that's the last book I'm going to pick up.
Oh my God. The amount of queries I get where it starts off with like, my, it's like, oh man.
I know. I know. Well, in a probably unfair segue to Michelle, she has a question here. I'm going to pop it up on the screen because it's a long question. And she was wondering what you look for with regards to a
Mhm.
synopsis. And there you go.
Mhm. That is very cool how you just popped it up there. That's amazing technology.
I enjoy it.
So when it comes to, yeah, when it comes to a synopsis, we look for essentially somebody. We look for jacket copy. If you go to a bookstore and you read the jacket copy on a hardcover or the copy on the back of a book, if you're going to write a good, and it's the same thing for query letters. It should be, I'd say, 2 to 3 paragraphs long, just enough information that it gets me interested, but not so much information that it sort of spoils things. It should make me want to read more. So I think a really good blueprint is like the jacket copy on a book in a bookstore, where it like you might introduce the characters or the setting or the time or where it takes place, and just whet people's appetites to make them want to read more. And it's a really tricky thing, but that's essentially what you want to do. Is like synopsis or jacket copy is really an appetite wetter to make the person want to take the book off the shelf and actually sit down and read it and say, like, this sounds really cool, I want to keep reading.
And I will add that because it's a hard thing to do, that's why I complimented you on it earlier, because you did a great job summarizing what's actually happening in your book without giving anything away and wanting people to read more. So what Jason did describing his own book is what you need to write in and write down and send in.
Yeah. Tell us who the character. Yeah. Tell us who the characters are. Tell us where this is happening and why it's happening, and tell us why we should care about these characters. Like, if you say, my detective Brick Hardcastle investigates a murder and has to fight the bad guy, is like, why do I care who Brick Hardcastle is? Who is he? Like, why is he different from any other sort of gumshoe that I've read about a million times? Like, tell me why your character or your story is different, and make me want to feel like, ooh, this sounds like it could be unique.
I'm not going to lie. I definitely want a Brick Hardcastle short story. All right.
He sounds like he belongs in a different kind of story, actually.
It's true. I started laughing the second you threw out Brick Hardcastle. All right. So I know reading time has been limited. Are there any recent releases that you have found time for as an escape from the pandemic that you are not publishing?
Absolutely. I'm actually in the middle of reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab, which is phenomenal. It's so good. And it's like, when you talk about like books that you can live in, this is the kind of book that you can live in. It's not crime or thriller at all, but it's basically about a young woman who, when she's a young woman in the 17th century, and literally makes a deal with the devil to avoid having to marry a man she doesn't want to. But in order to avoid this, she essentially promises her soul. But she essentially then has to, the trade-off is that she can live forever, but nobody will ever remember her. So literally she can meet someone and then 5 minutes later they forget who she is. So it's this woman who goes through literally centuries of history becoming like she's like smoke to these people. And how do you live like that? How do you go about existing? Because she knows that as soon as she dies, her soul is given to the devil. So she wants to live as long as possible, but emotionally she belongs to nobody. So it's just, the book is phenomenal, the writing is phenomenal, and it's the kind of book you can live in. And I would also recommend The Searcher by Tana French, which was marvelous. And it's interesting because it's almost not, it's a mystery, but not really, in that this is not meant as a pejorative, but not a whole lot happens in the book. The plot is fairly straightforward, but it's the setting and the language and the characters that, like, there could be 100 pages and not a lot happens in terms of action, but you're like watching life, and it's phenomenal. And it's just like the way these characters talk. There's like, all these scenes set at a bar, and like it's like you are there with them. And so to me, it's sort of one of those unique mysteries I've ever read, because the mystery in and of itself is almost secondary to the characters and the setting and just the atmosphere. But it's I absolutely loved it. So
Well,
I would definitely recommend those two.
Yeah, she's such a master of atmosphere that, like, she's a brilliant writer.
God.
So anything she does,
I mean, there's certain writers, like, even though like I said, there's some writers where like they can inspire me because I know I can do better. There's certain writers like V. Schwab with Addie LaRue, or The Searcher by Tana French, where I'm just like, it's going to take a lot of work to get anywhere near that level, because they are just they are great at what they do.
Yeah, well, you know what? Everyone's writing styles are different, and so
Yes.
it's at times comparing apples to oranges. But I know anytime you pick up a Tana French or I don't know, Addie LaRue, I still haven't read it. I need to. Everyone has
It's
told me
really
it's
good.
amazing.
It's really good.
But
Yeah.
everyone talks about just how beautifully they're written. So anyway, okay, because I know you and I know you love to collect books, I'm going to ask you this question. Your house catches fire.
Mm-hmm.
What in your collection are 2 or 3 books that you grab?
Okay, Mystic River by Dennis Lahain. I would say that's one book that, to me, as both a mystery reader and lover, is sort of like the pinnacle of the genre in a lot of ways. In terms of not just the story itself, but the way it takes on social issues, gentrification, racism, sexual abuse. That's the kind of book where, like, if I had the time, I'd read it every single year, because I think just Mystic River to me is just a beautiful, brilliant book. I would say On Writing by Stephen King, because that's my favorite book on writing I've ever read, both in terms of how it teaches the craft, but also gives you this sort of probably the closest thing to a memoir Stephen King will ever write, and as probably my favorite all-time writer, just the backstory about how he goes into how he got started. He was literally living in a trailer with his family, writing on a typewriter on an ironing board because he was so poor. From that, and then to Carrie, the paperback of Carrie selling for, like, I think, $400,000 back in 1977, which, $400,000 in 1977 is just unfathomable to somebody who's literally living in a trailer running on a ironing board. So I think On Writing. I would say maybe after that, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. That's my all-time favorite classic novel. When you sort of like look at the canon, I love that novel. I think it's just the uniqueness and the characters and the humor. I love that book, and I'm still convinced to this day that Jack Nicholson was horribly miscast in the movie, because he is not the Randall McMurray that I have in my mind when I read that book.
Fair enough. Great answers, and you were prepared. Those were quick. So we don't have any more questions, Jason. I don't know what's wrong with people. Maybe we just covered everything in life tonight. But
there's also like nothing going on. There's nothing going on right now. Like, it's kind of, the news cycle is pretty boring. Like, people aren't glued to their TVs waiting to see if we're about to, like, bomb Canada.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I'm sure that our virtual event is the biggest thing going on tonight. But still, we have people watching.
It should be.
we have people watching. They're just quiet. So
Yeah.
anyway, I want to say once again how much I enjoy the Rachel Marin books. Stranger at the Door
Thank you.
is out now. We would love if you are enjoying our events to consider ordering books from us. Let's see. Wendy said that it's just that they're loving listening to you. There's nothing to add. You're just listening
Aw.
to you, so we're good. Um,
We're being
so
quiet because you're fascinating. I don't know if that's true or they're being or they're just trying to make me feel better.
either way, I'm going to say fascinating, and we're going to pat ourselves on the back for a great talk and call
I'll
it
take it.
quits. So, Jason, as always, it was great talking with you. It's been too
You
long,
too.
and maybe we'll see you
Yes.
for the next
I can't
book.
wait to get there in person. Yeah, I can't wait to get there in
Yeah.
person. And I just want to like reiterate what you said, but if you're watching this right now, or if you're going to end up watching this online at some point, order books from Murder by the Book because this is a really, really hard time for small businesses and authors too. And they're only going to continue to exist if you support them. So if you watch this video or you watch other videos on their page, order books from them, support other authors because you want them to stick around because we all need these places in our communities.
Thanks, Jason. I truly appreciate that, and wish all the best for you and that beautiful family. And you just
Oh,
keep writing as much as you can in the chaotic times that we're living in, so we can chat
thank you
again
so
soon.
much. I can't
Good
wait.
night, everyone. Oh, neither can I. Good night, everyone.
Good night.